What if I switch from this tire to this tire? How would that affect the performance of my car? What if I switched from this pinion gear to this pinion gear? What would happen if I had this motor and I wanted to switch over to this motor? Maybe you own this battery and you want to switch to this battery. Then what happens? Well, the answers to all these questions and more can be found in rollout/gearing/speed charts. Hey, welcome to Mile High Speed, everyone. And today we are going to do a deep dive into these charts and show you how to read them, what's in them, how to use the data, and finally how to build one for yourself for just about any car out there. Check the timestamps in the video and feel free to jump to any of the content you find most interesting. But as always, we recommend you watch the whole thing because knowledge is power. So what is a rollout chart? Well, originally racers used rollout charts to understand their gear ratios, and as the name might imply, a rollout chart can reveal how far a car will roll for one rotation of the tire or the motor. But they've kind of evolved to show all kinds of information now, from gear ratios to estimating speed to system efficiency, and even the effects, as we noted earlier, of making changes to your vehicle, like what if you change the tire diameter, the motor kVA, the cell pack that you're using. So rollout charts are a wealth of information on your vehicle. So what does a rollout chart look like? Well, they're all different. They all have different information. They're all formatted a little differently. And the reason is we're using the term rollout chart here very loosely. The examples you see scrolling across your screen, some of these are gear ratio charts, some of them are true rollout charts, some are hybrids like the one we're going to be building. So they all look a little bit differently, and you can create them how you want to. One common theme is that they're all a bit intimidating because they have a lot of information and a lot of numbers. And we're going to cut through all that, take the mystery of the way. I'm going to show you a chart that I build for all my cars using Google Sheets or Excel. And we're going to walk you through that and show you what information is in there, how to use it and understand it, and then how to build one for any of the cars that you own. So let's take a look at this chart that I build one of these for all my vehicles. This one is for an Arrma Typhon 3S vehicle. And the key to these charts is that each one of these rows represents a unique setup for each one of the vehicles. So I'm going to highlight this one down here. This row represents the setup that the Arrma Typhon 3S comes with. And what we're going to do is isolate that one setup and clear out all the other data so that this is just much easier to see and understand. So what do we have here? You'll notice first that there are some red numbers, some black numbers, and some blue numbers. Red numbers very simply are just cells or data that you're going to input that you will know from your vehicle specification sheets. The black cells are cells that are working behind the scenes to do math to get to our resultant cells, which are the blue ones, which is the information we are looking for. So let's take a look at these each individually, and we'll go through the red cells first. First row, you're simply entering your pack voltage, 3S, 4S, 6S, whichever you may be using. Your next cell, red cell, is your tire diameter, typically given in millimeters. Next cell, your spur gear tooth count. Next cell is your pinion gear tooth count. This is the one you're probably going to be playing with and varying the most. Next cell, transmission ratio or internal gear ratio. Again, this will be found in your car's product specifications, on the website, in your owner's manual, somewhere. Next red input cell is your motor RPM. Now this one requires some math, but it's very simple math. To achieve this cell, you are simply going to be multiplying the kVA of your motor times the pack you are using and the pack voltage that you are using. So the voltage is written on your pack. So if you're using a 3S, you're going to do 11.1 multiplied by the kVA of the motor. That will result in this cell. Now here's where I'd recommend you build one more chart for your motor's RPM output. You'll have your kVA of the motor down the left, and all your battery packs across the top, and this will yield the RPM for almost any motor battery combination. Now let's take a look at the black cells. First black cell is pi. We need that because we're going to be working with circles and circumferences. The next cell is just a conversion of tire diameter to inches. Typically you're going to get that in millimeters, so this is a conversion to inches. Next black cell is your final drive ratio. Your final drive ratio is how many revolutions your wheels turn in comparison to the motor. So in this case 10.83, our motor is going to turn 10.83 times for every revolution of the wheel. Next black cell is your axle RPM. Next black cell, how many revolutions per hour is your axle running, because we're trying to get to miles per hour. And your final black cell is the tire circumference. Those red cells and black cells combine to give you an output of your estimated wheel speed, or your estimated car's miles per hour. Now that might be where you stop building this chart, but if you have the capability to track your actual miles per hour, if you have a GPS device or your phone or your transmitter can do it, and you can input your actual miles per hour right here into the next blue cell, you can get some very valuable information. So here's just where I've tracked the miles per hour that I actually achieved for that car. So the next cell over is the actual voltage efficiency that was required to achieve that actual miles per hour. Now this can be some very helpful data later on, and we'll show you how to use this in the follow-ups. The next cell over is just taking that full pack voltage and dividing by how many cells you have. So this is your efficiency per cell that was achieved using the actual miles per hour. So there's a rundown of everything that this chart has to offer. Next up, we'll show you how to use some of this data and how to build the chart itself, all the formulas, etc. that are required. Okay, so how can we use some of this data? Well, the first thing that we can do, back to the beginning of the video, is that we can alter some of the red inputs to indicate different changes we would be making to the vehicle. So let's see what would happen as we use this base setup for the Arrma Typhoon 3S if we start to alter some of the vehicle parameters. So let's take this base scenario, and under this scenario we said we would achieve 45 miles per hour. So now let's start changing some things. Let's try and alter the wheel or the tire diameter here. We're going to change this and raise it up, and you'll notice that there's an increase in the speed. Suddenly now I'm close to 50 miles per hour with that vehicle. If I change the gear ratio, I'm going to add teeth to the pinion, which we know is going to increase the car's speed. I am now all the way to 83 miles per hour, and my final drive ratio, my gear ratio, has now changed. So this is the first way you're going to use this information, is just testing different setups for the car, whether it be the motor's kVA, the pinion tooth count, the spur tooth count, the tire diameter, or the pack voltage that you're using. So that's the number one way we use this data. The second way we can use this data is using the actual miles per hour of your car tracked via a GPS device or your iPhone or something on your transmitter. If you can get this data, then you can work it backwards, work the formulas backwards in order to determine the pack's voltage drop under load for any given setup. So that is what this next cell is going to tell you. Here for the base setup, and given I achieved 49 miles per hour, the resultant voltage came to be 12.1 volts, or 4.0 volts per cell. That can be pretty handy information. How? Well, first, by noting that the car overachieved the estimated speed, I can tell this is a very efficient setup. And that's hardly surprising, given this is the setup that the car came in. Manufacturers aren't going to package their ready-to-run cars with electronics that aren't efficient. they'd be swamped with complaints and warranty claims after people burned out their electronics. But how do I know it's efficient? I know this because the estimated speed we calculated was based on the pack's standing or idle voltage of 11.1 volts. But as you can see, the car achieved its faster speed and did it with a calculated voltage of 12.1. So how did that happen? Well, we charge our packs to 4.2 volts per cell, which equals 12.6 volts. So the electronics under zero load should produce a speed based on 12.6 volts, a fully charged pack, not the 11.1 we used in our estimate. But all cars are under load of various nature, and that drags them lower. So this car setup achieved 12.1, which means I lost only 0.5 volts in voltage drop under load. That's efficient and tells me this setup is very safe for my electronics and would allow me to submit them to other load factors like tall grass, mud, long flat out top speed trigger pulls, etc. without putting much burden on them. So now let's plug this same setup back into the overall table. So here's that base very efficient setup down the bottom, now alongside a lot of other tested setups. You can see I organized them roughly by their efficiency, and looking at that efficiency number, I can try to pinpoint my car's tipping point where speed and fun is maximized while placing safe load on the electronics. I call this maximized setup. Any more efficient and you are simply sacrificing speed and not working your electronics very much. Any less efficient and you're starting to load your electronics, heat them, and put them in progressively riskier scenarios. Sure, you gain more speed, but at the cost of loading them up. Now, if you're doing speed runs, you want to maximize your speed and push your electronics to the limit, so you're just going to go as far as you can possibly go with this. But if you're bashing, you want to try and figure out where your car's speed is maximized while not stressing your electronics too much. And what I've generally found is a nice point to be at is about 3.9, 3.8 volts per cell. That should give you a lot of speed. It'll push your electronics enough to give you that speed without over pushing them, and meaning you can't drive through grass and mud and dirt and overheat the electronics. Now that's not a hard rule of thumb. There's a lot of variables there, but that's just what I have found. So you're going to be looking for that with your setups. You can search for that maximized setup. So as you can see, as I climb the setups to increase speed and load, the efficiency goes down. I'm falling shorter and shorter of my estimates because the electronics can't keep up. And finally up here, where I have the setups based on speed runs and extremely tall gearing, producing massive load, my voltage has dropped to a point where even the electronics are going to react to save the car, to save the battery, as most DSCs shut down at 3.0 volts per cell. Now that's adjustable, but that's about where they're all set. And you can see here we've dropped below that. So going even further, you can tell all my gains in speed are gone, as the load is just shutting down the ESC too quickly, and so there's really no need to pursue any gearing changes or any further setups beyond this because the electronics have been maximized. You can then also use this info to refine your speed estimates for your setups before getting actual GPS data on them. We can see what voltage drop my packs are under at various gear ratios, and thus matching that voltage and gear ratio on future estimates. For setups, I can get more accurate numbers. Instead of using the baseline 11.1 volts, I would use 10 volts for a car under load or with a given gear ratio, and my estimated speed is going to be much more accurate. So that's a deep dive into how you can use some of these actual output numbers and these last columns in the blue chart for more in-depth analysis and vehicle planning. So now that you've seen how to use all this, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of how you build it, the math, what you need to put into these cells to get them to work. Probably not the fun part, but this is what makes the magic happen. So I'm going to isolate again just to make things clear. I'm going to isolate it down to that base case, and let's take a look at what we got. So the first cell you're going to, so the reds are just inputs. We talked about that. You're just going to input what you know. The black cells, the first black cell is just pi, 3.14. So that is just another input. This cell is a conversion cell to get us from tire diameter in millimeters to tire diameter in inches. We need to be in inches because we want to get to miles per hour. We're leaving the metric system. We got to do it somewhere, so I do it here. Down in the bottom left, you can see the formula that you need to do this. You're going to take your tire diameter in millimeters, and you're going to multiply it by 0.03937, and that will give you your diameter in inches. Maybe your tires give you that. That'd be nice if it came that way. The next is your final drive ratio. In your final drive ratio, I actually have the equation written up here. I'm going to highlight that for you, or you can see it in the cell count down on the bottom left. But this is your spur gear divided by your pinion gear multiplied by your internal transmission ratio. That will result in your final drive ratio. So you can see that equation in the bottom left corner. Next up, axle RPM. So here we are going to be multiplying the motor's RPM by the final drive ratio. Next up, we want to convert that axle revolutions per minute to axle revolutions per hour because we want to get to miles per hour. So another pretty simple formula, we're going to take this cell and multiply it by 60. Whoops, there you go, 60. And that'll give you your axle RPM. Now our last cell, last black cell, is probably the trickiest one to get. And this is your tire circumference, but we're going to not only get the circumference of the tire, we're going to convert that all the way to its measurement in miles. So that 0.00022 number you see there is my tire diameter in mile units. Pretty crazy. But, so what you're going to do is you're going to take your tire diameter in inches and you're going to multiply it by pi. So you can see this formula down the bottom left what you're going to do. But you're going to take this guy, diameter per inches, times pi first. That's your first step. Now, because you're in inches, you want to convert to feet. So divide that number by 12. And then you're going to divide that number by 5,280 because that's how many feet are in a mile. So what you're going to end up with here is your tire circumference in miles, so that the final cell that you're trying to achieve, your blue cell, the ultimate reason you're doing this is you're going to multiply your axle's RPM times that diameter in miles to give you this final cell estimated speed count. From there, the final two cells, we know this is just an input. If you have a GPS, you're going to get that from tracking your car. The final two cells for your actual voltage, now this gets pretty complicated. This is just working backwards through the formula. So you'll remember that motor RPM is kVA times the pack voltage. So we knew that going in, and what we didn't know was miles per hour to get here. Now we know the miles per hour, but what we don't know is the pack voltage. So you're going to do the math backwards, knowing the thing you're missing is pack voltage. So just run all the mathematics backward. That will give you this count. And then, of course, just divide that total pack voltage by the number of cells you have, in this case 3, and that'll give you your actual voltage per cell. So those are the inputs you need to do in order to create this crazy wonky table and get all the data you could ever need on all your cars. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope this helps you enjoy the hobby just a little bit more.